QSO Today, episode 373, Paul Mower VA6MPM. My thanks to ICOM America for sponsoring the QSO Today podcast. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guthfor Z1UG, where I demonstrate the diversity and relevance of the amateur radio hobby and its impact on society by interviewing ham radio operators, many of whom played vital roles in shaping our technology through the amateur radio hobby. And while many people might say, ham radio, do people still do that? This podcast demonstrates, through an in-depth interview, how just amazing, diverse, and dynamic the amateur radio hobby continues to be. Trekking across the Canadian Rockies without communications convinced Paul Mower VA6MPM that amateur radio could connect him to the outside world when he is far beyond cellular telephone coverage. Paul enjoys working summits on the air from some of the most remote outposts in the world. VA6MPM is my QSO today. VA6MPM, this is Eric for Z1UG. Are you there, Paul?
I am, Eric. It's good to meet you, and you're coming in loud and clear.
Paul, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. I might mention that Paul was a speaker at the QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo in August, where he spoke about soda. I'll have a link to that in the show notes page. But Paul, let's start at the beginning of your story. When and how did that story start for you?
Well, it really started when I was a kid. I grew up in Kenya during high school, and we had a shortwave radio there. And I was intrigued with that. Of course, there was no hams that I knew, and throughout my life there were no hams. But that intrigue with signals carrying across oceans fascinated. But it started in earnest several years ago, actually kind of in an unorthodox way. I was sitting at my desk. I have a home office. I was sitting at my desk. My phone rang, and a fellow picked up on the other line. He introduced himself as a ham radio operator who was traveling through our area. And he said he had just received a call on his radio from a friend of mine named Mark Ellingson. Asked if I knew him. I said, yeah, I know Mark. And he says, yeah, your friend Mark said you will know where he's at. And I said, yeah, he's out camping with his two young boys. And I knew where he was. And the guy says, well, apparently his truck won't start. And it was about minus 20 Celsius. So I knew this was a problem. So I arranged to get my buddy taken care of, get his truck out of there. And this was all done over the radio. And I was just intrigued with that. It just fascinated me that my buddy Mark, who had the very lowest level, what would be considered the U.S. technician's license, was able to call in the cavalry out from the backcountry. And
would he not have cellular telephone service there?
No, there was no cell phone service where he was at.
His life might have been saved, by ham radio, right?
Well, it is possible, yes. And I thought about that because it was, he was in most places in the Canadian Rockies that there is no cell phone service. And so one of the things I do is I do casual work for the Alpine Club of Canada. I do custodial work in the system. The Alpine Club of Canada has a whole fleet of backcountry huts, about 35 huts scattered throughout the Canadian Rockies. And so I spend a lot of time in the backcountry, and I found myself about 2 weeks after this incident skiing across from Alberta into British Columbia across the Continental Divide in very, very remote location. And I was on assignment from the Alpine Club to go in and check on a brand new hut that had just been built, and they had not posted any route descriptions, and there was no GPS markings for this hut yet. So I'd spent about 12 hours, my buddy and I, and the warmest it got was minus 30 Celsius that day. And we had traveled all day in very, very remote conditions. And by the time I got to this hut, we were exhausted, hungry, cold, and I got to this hut and it was locked. They'd forgotten to give me the key the code to the door. And so standing on the steps of that hut, I said, whatever I do when I get back, I'm going to get whatever license my buddy had, because I got to figure out a way to communicate when I'm in the backcountry. And so that's how it started. When I got back, I took the test, and my buddy said, all you need to do is get 70% on your test to get your license. And so I didn't even really study. I just went down and took the test and got that license. And that's really how it started.
That's a huge argument for people that say, well, what do you need ham radio for? we have cellular telephones. There's a fair part of the world, maybe the largest part of the world, that actually doesn't have cell phone coverage. That does make a difference. But you know me, if you told me before we started recording that you listen to the QSO Today podcast, and so therefore I think we're too forward in the story. We have to go way back. And so I'm gonna ask you that why you were in Kenya for high school. I mean, what was the hometown? Where were you? Did you originally originate, and how did you find yourself in Kenya?
Well, I was actually born in the States originally, and I grew up a good part of my life until we moved to Kenya in Jackson, Wyoming, which is a mountain town steeped in mountain culture, I would say. And so I got my taste of mountaineering very young in Jackson, Wyoming. But my father, he worked for the Forest Service. He was a forest ranger, and he took a job with the government of Kenya. And we just on a fluke, I don't know. I will thank my father forever for taking this leap of faith and dragging his family, a young family, to Kenya and giving us an opportunity to grow up there and having experiences that we would not otherwise have.
How long were you there?
Well, I was there during high school. I was there a couple years. Then I went back and went to university there as well. After I got married, Kenya sort of changed my life, really. It defined me. And so I knew that when I got married, whoever I married, it would be important to bring them back there so that they could experience some of the things I did. So I got married while I was still in university, and we saved our money, went back, enrolled in the University of Nairobi, and stayed there for a while. Academically, it wasn't a great advantage, but as Mark Twain said, I never let my schooling interfere with my education.
I say that frequently to my kids. That's the...
Yeah, it's an important mantra.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Nairobi. I think I read an amazing novel called Cutting for Stone, which I think took place in Kenya.
Yes.
Probably the best books I've ever read. And so there is an allure of Africa that people have. I mean, I guess they think of being out on the veldt and seeing the wild animals. But what was the allure for you once you went back? It might seem like a primitive society for people that don't travel the world. Yes,
and that's true. And I think that is the allure, that it is not developed. We can do things that we wouldn't normally do in the West. There's a certain amount of freedom in living in a country that is not as developed as where you may have grown up. And for example, my mountaineering really began in earnest in Kenya, on Mount Kilimanjaro, on the rock buttresses along the Rift Valley escarpment. That's really where I started my mountaineering. And, I spent lots of time in the bush. My father worked clear up in the northeast province of Kenya, and he'd be away for weeks at a time, and I'd often go with him, or I would take, in fact, I can remember my high school counselor called me in the office one day and said, Paul, he said, our school is on the American system. In order for you to graduate, you cannot miss any more than 20 days per year. And she said, according to the records, you have missed 25 days, and it's not even Christmas time. I spent a lot of time out, and my parents sort of allowed me to have that freedom, which was a wonderful opportunity.
In the end, did the school allow you to have that freedom as well, so that you were able to graduate?
Yeah, it did, but my education path has taken years. It took me 7 years just to get a university degree. So I have a habit of taking time off and sort of disappearing into the mountains.
Well, I have to tell you, for other reasons, and this is just between us and nobody else, and that is, it took me 7 years to get a bachelor's of science. And
well,
it was a wife who said, you have to declare a major because we're leaving next year. I loved being in school. And it was like, if I hadn't gotten married, I'd probably still be there. But I loved being in school. And she says, just declare something. And
well, I applaud that educational route. I do.
What did you end up majoring in?
It's a funny thing. All I wanted to do in my life was go back to Africa. And I thought, well, what do I do? So I went into political science. I thought I'll be a diplomat because many of my friends' parents, that's what they did. And I was taking a university course from a professor that I actually knew in Kenya, just because it was a fun course. And he caught me after the course and said, Paul, what's your major? And I told him political science. He said, okay. And he wrote down a name. And he said, why don't you go to see this person tomorrow and change your major to business? And I said, why? I hate business. He says, it doesn't matter what you hate, Paul. He said, you need a job and you're not going to find one in political science. So just change your major. And he says, you speak Japanese, right? And I said, yeah, I speak Japanese. And he says, well, just major in business, get a job and figure it out for me. So I changed my major, went into business, and have ended up in this sort of niche business where I'm exporting agricultural products, mostly to Japan. And actually also the Middle East, the cultures that I have been the most comfortable with, I suppose.
You're a guy from Wyoming who lands in Kenya. Why do you speak Japanese?
Well, I was born in Utah, and our Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we often send missionaries out when they're young, 19 years old. We can't choose where we go. I ended up going to Japan and ended up coming back with the ability to speak Japanese. So it wasn't any
No, but it's still cool.
Yeah, it is.
I think I've interviewed Mormons before, and you're right. They could end up in South America or Central America or wherever. So I think that's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
You've been able to leverage all of this education and this experience in an agricultural grains business, which I think is...
Yeah. I worked for Honda, the car company, for many years. And as Honda, as most people don't know, at one time was a large exporter of agricultural products to Japan. And you can imagine within a car company, there of the thousands and thousands of employees, there's very few that have any agricultural background. I was one of the few, and my only background was that I'd hauled hay during the summer for a farmer in Utah. And so I was by de facto ended up in the agricultural export industry. And when Honda abandoned all of that while I was working for them in Canada, I resigned and just started doing the same thing basically on my...
I was a history major. In the end, that was what I declared. And I had some courses in Japanese history. So I think Honda was one of the Zaibatsu trading corporations, right? So for the listeners, I think that meant that these families, the Honda dynasty, they had lots of businesses. They were a conglomerate.
Well, actually, that's not completely true. Those Zaibatsu families were a little different because actually Honda, Soichiro Honda, he really grew from the very bottom. He came from very humble background, and he built the company up just because it's his sheer love of going fast and building fast cars, racing. And so it was a little bit different. He was an unorthodox player in the Japanese auto industry when things first started. And for many, in fact, Honda's way more popular in the States than it is in Japan.
Is that amazing?
Yeah, it is. It is.
I remember seeing shipping containers that said Honda on it, and they were obviously shipping more than cars.
Yeah. Well, I'll bet you what you were seeing was not Honda, probably Hyundai, which was a Korean company.
Also, right.
I'll bet you that's what you probably saw, because Honda, at one time, in fact, the reason Honda Trading, my company, even started in agricultural exports was that Honda owned their own vessels and had big ships that said Honda across the bow.
Right.
They pull into the port of Long Beach and unload the cargo and then sail home empty. And Honda realized in the beginning that was bad PR, it was bad business. And so they started Honda Trading and said, our mandate was to export anything at low value, high volume, just build these ships up going back. And so hay for the Japanese dairies, scrap paper and scrap metal was one of the first commodities that Honda started shipping. And the agricultural products kind of went on, it carried on that tradition of export for many, many years.
One of my incarnations, I was a marine radio service technician in the Long Beach port. So that must be where I remember seeing the Honda ships.
You would have. Yeah. They would have big blue ships with Honda right across the bow.
So until I got married, I was 130 pounds, skinny as a rail. And in the company, I could fit in the rudder post porthole on a tugboat. To fix an autopilot. So I was very, very popular in the company I worked for when they needed somebody in the bilge.
Huh.
So I became an expert on rudder posts and automatic pilots on tugboats, to my sorrow, because it was not a place to be.
Oh, you got stuck down in the bilge probably too often.
A bilge rat. And now this message from ICOM America. Contest remotely or from the comfort of your home. You heard that right. The 4 ICOM rigs that I will discuss in this message can be remotely controlled using the optional RSBA1 software. And these days, given the high electronic noise and HOA restrictions, you might want to remotely operate your ICOM rig in a mountain cabin or rural parcel from anywhere in the world over the Internet. Now you can. ICOM has the perfect base station ready for remote control action. The ICOM IC7851, IC9700, IC7610, and the IC7300 SDR transceivers are top of the line and are the first choice for contesters, DXers across the globe. The ICOM IC7851 is HF excellence unparalleled and gives you a new window into the RF world. With faster processors, high input gain, high display resolution, and a cleaner signal, it is truly the pinnacle of HF transceiver perfection. Features include dual receivers, digital IF filters, memory keyer, digital voice recorder, a high-resolution spectrum waterfall display, enhanced PC connectivity with both USB and Ethernet connectivity, SD memory card slot. Create your own band opening with the ICOM IC9700. This transceiver brings direct sampling to the UHF-VHF weak signal world. This all-mode transceiver is loaded with innovative features that are sure to keep you busy: faster processors, higher input gain, higher display resolution, and a cleaner signal. It has a 4.3-inch touchscreen color TFT LCD, real-time high-speed spectrum scope, and waterfall display. Smooth satellite operation with 99 satellite channels, dual watch operation, full duplex operation in satellite mode. The ICOM IC7610 is the SDR every ham wants. This high-performance SDR can pick out the faintest of signals even in the presence of stronger adjacent signals. The ICOM IC7610 is a direct sampling software-defined radio that will change the world's definition of an SDR transceiver. RF direct sampling system, 110 dB RMDR, independent dual receiver, dual digicell. Both the ICOM IC9700 and the IC7610 have Ethernet connections on their back panels to allow direct connection to your router without a server PC for remote control using the RSBA1 software. The ICOM IC7300 changed the way that entry-level HF is designed. This high-performance innovative HF transceiver with its compact design will far exceed your expectations. RF direct sampling, 15 discrete bandpass filters, large 4.3-inch color touchscreen, real-time spectrum scope, SD memory card slot. Remote control can be made using a small computer or Raspberry Pi using the RSBA1 remote control software. This is amazing. So even if you live in an HOA or in the center of the city, where ham radio operation may not be ideal, ICOM has a remote base station solution with just the right rig to fit your requirements and budget. Please, when you visit your favorite dealer to purchase your ICOM rig, be sure to tell that dealer that you heard about it here on QSO Today. And now, back to our QSO. Okay, well, now you say on your QRZ page that, of course, the distractions of automobiles and girls. The unfortunate thing about growing up in California is that automobiles and girls is the huge distraction for most males. It seems like that it got you, but you still had an interest in the sciences and stuff. So did these interests, including this interest in amateur radio that you'd left behind, did that play a part in the choices that you made then for your education and even the career that you chose? Now, why Canada? Is that where you landed with Honda and then you decided to stay in Canada?
It was. I came up here to manage a hay export operation. And during the time I was here, Honda decided that they're a car company. They're not an agricultural company. And so they disbanded all of the agricultural businesses. And at the time, rather than go back, I had already fallen in love with Canada. So I resigned and just stayed here and started doing the same kind of agricultural exports as I had done during most of my.
And that causes you now to even still to travel worldwide?
Yeah, it does. I go to Japan frequently and to the Middle East frequently because those are my two main.
Right. So there's a picture of you, I think, on your QRZ page in Dubai. And we were just talking about Dubai. Dubai is now 2 hours from Israel. As soon as our COVID restrictions open up, then we'll see a lot more Dubaians here in Israel. And a lot of Israelis, we love to travel, so we'll be in Dubai at some point. I have, as I told you before, I have staff from the expo that lives in Dubai, and they were just saying that it was a beautiful 42 degrees centigrade in Dubai.
Yeah,
I think that's hot.
It is. I think we should wait a few months before we go over there when it cools off some.
Somebody told me that in Dubai they chill the water in the pool so that you can swim in the pool.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
But they also have a ski slope. Did you, when you were in Dubai, did you snow ski?
No, I haven't. In fact, it'd be hard for me to do that because we have the best skiing in the world in Canada. Dubai's no place to go to ski. It's interesting. It's a novelty.
It's a novelty, but it's not like skiing the Canadian Rockies.
No, not at all. Not at all.
I think we're kind of caught up from the standpoint of we can start talking about amateur radio. You got your license, and then what happened after that? I saw a picture of you in your presentation that you started with kind of a technician class license. How did that work out for you? Yeah,
well, it worked for a while, but I realized fairly quickly in the remote Alpine Club of Canada huts that I was visiting, VHF wasn't going to cut the mustard, and I needed to get an HF license, which I did. And then I since that time, I've been carrying an HF radio to when I go into the backcountry because I do casual custodial and maintenance work for the Alpine Club of Canada. So I'm back in the backcountry frequently. I enjoy that, and so I carry my radio with me in there as a means of communication. And that's really what intrigued me about the radio, and it's been a wonderful opportunity. You know, I used to first. When I went into the backcountry, I would arrange a sked with some of my friends, but I quickly found that the propagation was unpredictable, my schedule is unpredictable, and I also found that the ham radio community at large is wonderful. So I started to just get on the radio, break into conversations, get on nets, and I've been able to then communicate with somebody who is in turn able to get messages to my wife saying that I'll be late or I made it to where I need to be on time. But that's been my means of communicating with home when I've been in the backcountry.
Now, when you're in the backcountry, how long is your trip?
Well, it depends. Usually if I go into one of the huts, usually 3 days, a day to get into it, a day to do whatever I need to do, and then a day to get out. So I'm typically 3 days, but some of the traverses across some of the ranges that I do may be longer than that. And then since I got involved in summits on the air, day trips are probably more common than not.
You try to return the same day.
Yeah, on most of my SOTA operations I do. Try to do most of them on day trips, but still there's quite a few overnighters as well.
Well, I think the majority of people that might listen to the QSO Today podcast might, when they hear people talking about SOTA, they're talking about day trips, probably dry day trips. And being that you're far north and probably there's still probably snow on the ground even in the summer, it seems to me that maybe the question that people would want me to ask is, what's the minimalist packing that you do in order to be able to not only take the things you need, water, food, whatever, and the radios? And have you kind of mastered that? Yeah,
I think so. Depending on the style of SOTA operation we do, activators will choose their own system. What I rely on is I'll take my radio. I try to carry no more than I would normally carry. So I don't carry a fiberglass mast like many do. I have an avalanche probe that I typically carry with me in winter activations anyway, and I use that as a mast. I'll attach my trekking poles together to put an end fed halfway between maybe my avalanche probe and my trekking poles. because most of my activations would be above tree line, and so I'm propping that up with rocks, and I use a Elecraft KX2 and little water and lunch, for a day trip. In Canada, at our latitudes, I will often carry an amplifier so that I can get 40 to 50 watts out. It makes it a little easier for the chasers and a little more fun. Overnight trips, I won't carry that, but for day trips, I will often carry that.
And that means you have to carry batteries? Do you bring solar panels or anything like that as well?
I will carry a battery pack for the radio and then a separate battery pack, usually LifePo 4 small battery pack to power the amplifier. And I will, I don't carry anything excess, so I can get 2 or 3 activations out of one battery charge, but probably no more. I wouldn't carry any more power than to get that much. And even in multi-day trips, if I'm just looking for communication on like a mountain traverse, then I'll just limit my radio use and try not to carry, because we really can't afford to carry too much weight on those trips.
What's your backup plan if you run out of battery and you still need the communications? Is that faith?
I really don't have one. I really don't have one. So no, I don't. Solar panels would be a great option, but there really is none. And that's one of the things that I think my activations may differ from many. There's a lot of levels of mountaineering, and there's a certain level where you step out where there is no safety net. When I leave a hut and I know that if I don't make it to the next hut, there is no safety net. So I try to make sure that, what I'm saying is I'm used to that type of feeling. So I try to limit my operations to where I will at least have enough battery power in an emergency if I were to need one.
Do you carry like one of the Jarman satellite communicators as a...
I don't.
To please your wife?
I don't. Someday she may force me to start taking one of those, but I've come from the old school where when I started mountaineering, we had no communication, and I've sort of become used to that. I've never really gone down that road, and the HF radio has been sufficient. That's probably all that I will ever use.
Do you travel by yourself?
Most of the time I do. Most of my soda trips I am alone. I'm starting to get to the age where my buddies are not able to come with me any longer, and I kind of like to do things that even the younger guys probably aren't willing to do. And so most of my soda trips are alone. Now, some of the really difficult, intense journeys, I do have a couple buddies that come with me often, and that helps on the ones where it's just simply ludicrous to be on your own. Then of course I have a partner, but for most of my soda trips, most of them I'm alone.
Will the Alpine Club of Canada supply you with a Sherpa, or maybe a younger member that could be that buddy?
Unfortunately, they consider me the Sherpa. so no, they when they send me into one of these places, that's the reason they do is because they know I can get in and make it, and I have the equipment to do so. But some of the long journeys, of course, yeah, I will. I have a good friend, Eric Peterson, that will often go with me and do some of the more difficult journeys with me.
Is there something that you've learned being at the top of the world with a half-wave end-fed antenna just a few feet above the ground in terms of how to optimize the operation of that antenna in a snowfield? Or
yeah, there are little things that you learn, and actually you mentioned snowfield. That always helps. If I can be over snow, that helps. But there are little tricks you learn that I have learned anyway, and in operating style and in setup. And I think the biggest thing though that I've learned is that once you reach the top of a summit, you're exhausted, and you may be affected by altitude. Your nerves are frayed. Your adrenaline's been going through your body through the day, and you don't do things, you make a lot of mistakes. So the simpler you can keep things, the better off. That's really the main thing that I have learned.
I want to take a minute to tell you about my favorite podcast, the Ham Radio Workbench Podcast, with George, KJ6VU, and now joined by Rod, VA30N, Mike, VA3MW, Mark, N6MTS, and Vince, VE6LK. Every 2 weeks, George and company offer up a status report on the many amateur radio projects on their workbenches and explore projects on their guests' workbenches. This group is project active and prolific, covering many technical areas of amateur radio. So the next time you want a deep dive into ham radio electronic project building, or to learn about technology, tools, test equipment, construction techniques, and the rest, listen to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast, available on every podcast player and channel. Use the link in this week's show notes page to get to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast directly. And now back to my QSO. Does it make a difference in the direction that you send that antenna out or how you support it?
Yeah, it probably does. But most of the summits that I'm on, that you really don't have that liberty. You've got a ridge line and there's not much room. So you've really got one option. And with my antenna, it's nice to have a wire cut for 40 meters, but often you don't have room for that either. So if you can get a 20-meter wire out, you're doing well on some of the summits that I'm on. And so you don't have a lot of options on orientation or even height off the ground, and sometimes even what to attach them to. So you're almost always compromised in some way.
So you've got essentially a 30-foot piece of wire out there on 20 meters. I guess what you were saying is it doesn't necessarily make sense to send it in any particular direction, because any of the hams that you speak to, regardless of where they're at, could pass a message for you.
Yes, that's exactly right. And, in SOTA, we can spot ourselves if we can get cell phone reception. So I typically operate SS single sideband, and so I have to figure out some way to spot myself. And so that can be done if I got cell phone reception, and sometimes it surprises me where I can get it at the tops of mountains. But if I can't get cell phone reception, sometimes APRS works, and other times I just have to dig up contacts from anybody that I can scrape up, breaking into conversations or other things like that.
How do you use APRS? Are you carrying like 2-meter radio or something like that as well?
Yeah, I do. I carry my 2-meter radio as well. And mine is not APRS capable, so I really tether it to my phone. And I have an app on my phone which will send a packet. And I'll push the PTT at the same time I push send on my phone, and that will send it out. It's a little fiddly, but it does work.
Now, what I remember from snow camping in the Colorado Rockies with the Boy Scouts, what I remember is trying to be a ham radio operator and finding that it was so cold there that none of the radios worked because the batteries froze. How do you protect your batteries to make sure that they still have a charge? Do you wear them on you in order to use body temperature to keep them warm?
Yeah, that's exactly right. With batteries, I always keep them on my body in my pocket on the longer trips, because even you'll suck the life out of them. Even if it doesn't make them unusable, you'll suck a lot of the life out of them. And if you've got a multi-day trip and need them to last for several days, in a lot of our winter operations, it's best to carry them on your body, and I usually do. Now,
in any of these huts, is there any power at all?
The Alpine Club of Canada huts are quite nice. They're wonderful. Most of them, they'll have a heating source, whether it's a wood stove and firewood is hauled up there on a helicopter, or there's propane. So there's a heating source, and they're well furnished with cooking utensils. It's really kind of a wonderful place to spend the time in the backcountry if you ever get a chance. A person should really go to the Alpine Club of Canada website and look at their fleet of huts, because there are some wonderful places to stay.
And your presentation, or maybe was it your presentation, or maybe it was one of the websites I saw, I'll put a link to it. There was also a nice tour of one of the newer huts that looked like it had a big room for gathering 30 people.
Yes. Yeah, big common room. That was probably the Bow Hut, what that you're referring to, and it's the largest hut that the Alpine Club operates. It's got a large common room with sleeping quarters off in a different area. But yeah, it's very comfortable. It's a lot of fun to spend time in the huts. And that one in particular is frequented by a lot of mountain guides, bringing clients into that hut and then making climbing journeys out from that hut.
That's the base.
Yes, that would be the base. And most of the Alpine Club of Canada huts are built for that purpose as a base for mountaineering objectives that are nearby.
Are you making those mountain objectives also SOTA objectives so that you can actually get SOTA summits?
Yeah, I am. It's really one of my funnest things to go into one of the Alpine huts and then make SOTA summits from that hut. It's just a lot of fun, and it's a wonderful way to do it because it gives you a nice, safe, warm base camp to leave from and then return back to.
Have you done SOTA in Switzerland?
No, I haven't, and I'd love to.
You heard the interview with Renee.
I love listening to his stuff, and I love following him on YouTube and things because I feel that the Swiss Alps are very similar to the Canadian Rockies in many ways.
I think the Europeans go on vacation for like 6 weeks in the summer. So
they do. The big difference between the mountains in Europe, the Swiss Alps and the Canadian Rockies, is the remoteness. I think statistically there's no place in the Alps where you can get any more than, say, 5 kilometers from a habitable dwelling, where in our Canadian Rockies, there are places I've been and you could walk north, for example, and never cross a road or see another sign of civilization clear to the North Pole. I mean, you can. It's much more remote, and we get a lot of European climbers that come to the Canadian Rockies, and that's always the thing that they remark on, and the thing that they come for is the remoteness and the opportunity to go places where few people go.
If you were going to enhance your SOTA operation on a 3-day trek, what's on your wish list for making that possible?
You know, I would not add any more equipment. I don't think I would do anything different. I would want to be more fit. I would want to be more experienced, more capable is really the only things, but I certainly wouldn't want to take any more equipment. In most backcountry operations, less is better.
Are there some areas of ham radio that when you're not in the mountains, when you're a flatlander, are there some areas of amateur radio that you're exploring right now that you'd like to learn about? That?
Yeah, I do. You know, I love to operate from my QTH. You know, the only radio I have is Elecraft KX2, but it's a wonderful radio, and I love plugging it in at home because I have an amplifier. I can get 200 watts out. I love chasing DX. I really enjoy that. I love doing things like that. And you know, even though it's a portable radio, the KX2 is a very capable radio. In fact, just the other day, I operated split with a DX station, and that's things that normal portable radios are not capable of doing. But the Elecraft is really a fun radio, and I really love operating at home. I love chasing DX. I love getting on nets, rag chewing with people. I enjoy all aspects of that. But I would say I use it mostly for portable, but I love operating at home with an amplifier.
What's the antenna that you use at home?
You know, I have a fan dipole. I have an 80-meter wire hung, and then I hung below it a 40 and a 20. So I can run resonant on 80, 40, 20, 10, 15. And I really enjoy it. I love operating it. It's a lot of fun. And it's surprisingly effective with as simple an antenna as I have. You know, I think the thing about ham radio is enjoyment. And I don't think I could enjoy it any more than I do. I just love operating the way I do. I love chasing DX with my simple station. I love being in the backcountry with my radio. It's just been a lot of fun.
Are you thinking about exploring other operating modes besides single sideband?
I am. You know, I would like to operate CW, and but I don't think I'm ready yet. And one of the things I like about single sideband, it requires a little explanation because most SOTA operators, I would say the vast majority are CW operators. You carry less stuff, they're more efficient, they're just suited. CW is so suited for soda, and so I'm asked often why I don't pursue that. And there are a couple of reasons, and one is that a lot of my activations are done alone, and when I spend all day long getting to the top of a difficult summit, and by the time I'm at the summit, my nerves are frayed, the adrenaline's going, I'm lonely. Sometimes and I have to anticipate sometimes a dangerous, lonely journey back. I find it so comforting to hear these voices of chasers who have become familiar. There's guys like Gary and Martha, John, Christian from France. All these names that have become familiar. It buoys me up, gives me encouragement, confidence, and it helps me on my return journey. I enjoy that part. And so I kind of hate to give that up when I'm at a summit. I enjoy that single sideband operation. That's one thing. And then the other is, I got into this thing because of a need of having safety in the backcountry. And I've talked with helicopters by phone. I've talked with other mountain guides, with search and rescue people. That's all been done by phone. I doubt I'm ever going to call in a rescue on CW. There's certain things in the backcountry communication that are just better done single sideband. And so I've kind of concentrated my efforts in that area. And it's not that CW is not better, because it probably is, but it's just the way I am.
I saw the picture on your QRZ page of the fan dipole.
Yeah.
Very professional looking installation on your house. Do you have a ham radio mentor that helps you with some of the stuff that might seem obvious to the old timers, but may not seem so obvious to the newcomers?
Yeah, absolutely. When I first got into radio and realizing that my background was not technical, I immediately joined a club because I knew I was going to need help. And a fellow that lives in town, Brian Davies, VE6CKC, has been extremely generous with his time, helping me get that fan dipole tuned up and installed and teaching me what I need to know to do that. And he's been great. VE6CIA, another member of the club, has been very generous with his time. There's a person should join a club and get to know people, because you're going to need help no matter how much knowledge you have.
And what's your radio club?
It's the Central Alberta Amateur Radio Club. CARP is the name of the club. And that's a great bunch of people, very, very generous with their time and willing, capable people. I've met many of them and grown to appreciate them.
It's my understanding that Canada has been kind of locked down more than perhaps the United States and even Israel.
Yeah.
Have they been meeting on Zoom or virtually as a...
Yeah. We have our own club repeater. We did that for a while, and we met on the repeater. Then lately we have got a Zoom account, and we have been having some Zoom meetings, but we have missed quite a few. We'll look forward to getting back into the routine, but we are in the process of getting more Zoom meetings scheduled and set up, because that's been effective.
Now, one of the things I noticed is that the presentation that you gave at the QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo, you've given before. It seems either before or after, but and you've done it all over Canada, I think, by Zoom. I
have. There's been several clubs that's asked me to do the presentation, and I have a few others lined up. That the presentation is very visual, because I have to mention there are a lot of soda activators that are more prolific than I am. There's better mountaineers. There's more fit people. There's a lot of people that do it better than I do. But I happen to live in the area that has the most beautiful mountains in the world, bar none. I will defend that statement. And so therefore, the presentation that I've done is quite visual, and there's some stunning photos, and I think it's been, I think clubs, particularly anybody likes looking at pretty pictures, so it's been popular.
Of course, and maybe you're the intersection of soda, pretty pictures, the best mountains in the world. I mean, individually you may not be the top of all of them, but the intersections all come to you. We will return to our guests in just a moment. A new way to show your support of the QSO Today podcast is to buy me a coffee. I consume gallons of coffee to create this weekly podcast. invite me for coffee by pushing the yellow button, Buy Me a Coffee, on the QSO Today show notes page. And now back to our QSO Today. I noticed in one of the videos that you had there that looked like there was a drone flying over you.
Yes.
Are you the drone pilot?
No, my buddy, I have a buddy who I'd mentioned, Eric Peterson, comes out with me on most of my difficult journeys. And he has a drone, and he's also a very keen amateur photographer. So he does a lot of, he also has a YouTube channel, and he's got one of the videos of our soda operations on his YouTube channel. But he does most of that. The drone photography. In fact, we have a soda trip set up in a couple of weeks where we're going to take his drone with us and try to do a mountain that hasn't been active yet.
Well, there's a business idea, it seems to me. The business idea is a jacket that has enough pockets designed for holding different kinds of batteries. The drone batteries, the radio batteries, the amplifier batteries.
You know, it is a big problem. I mean, with my buddy Eric, with his cameras, just with his cameras and drone batteries, he carries a lot of batteries, and it is a juggling act to keep them all warm. It really is.
They used to have these packages that if you broke them all up, you could use them to warm up stuff. I guess the only problem is you have to carry those too.
But you know, they're not that heavy, and actually we have used those with batteries. That's another thing that helps a lot. Is you'll break one of those hand warmers open and wrap it around your battery pack. If it has to reside in your backpack, that's another way to keep them warm. We've done that. We deal with in Canada. Probably the main thing we deal with is cold weather and long winters. So a lot of our activities are wintertime activities. And even if they're not wintertime, like soda gives a bonus for wintertime activations. And many of our activations, people would suspect that they're wintertime activations, but even our summertime activations, we're often on skis in snow, dealing with inclement weather.
Well, I've lived as far north as Denver, Colorado, and I'm assuming that that's way far south than Alberta. So the question that comes to mind is that if you're driving your car or truck to the trailhead, you know, where you begin your journey, how do you start your car or truck when you come back? If it's minus 30 degrees and all that stuff, is there a trick that the Canadians have for parking for more than a few hours?
Well, I think most of it is that you tend to learn your vehicle's ability. For example, my truck, I know it will start down to minus 35. Between minus 35 and minus 40, it's getting sketchy, but it's mostly just knowing your vehicle. And by the time you end up in the mountains, you pretty much know how cold you're going to be able to get before that vehicle won't start when you get back. But it is something you have to watch, because if you get back and you can't start your vehicle, there's got to be a backup plan. But one thing to note, in Canada, we don't have a lot of roads going through our mountains like perhaps in the United States, where there's a lot of roads. So typically we're parking on the highway and then walking into the backcountry from the highway. So there probably is help when we finally get back out of the bush.
So if you need a jump start or something like that?
Yeah, there's probably somebody.
It's not like there's electric plugs for block heaters, you know, at the trailhead. Usually
not at the trailhead, although most businesses and so forth in Canada will have plug-ins for your vehicle, but at the trailhead, no.
Has your spouse decided that she might want to be a ham radio operator instead of receiving the calls over the phone?
No, she sees me come limping in after long journeys and thinks, I want nothing to do with this.
So she's associating ham radio with physical danger.
Absolutely, yeah.
That seems to be something. Do you have a say a 1-year amateur radio goal? Is there some skill or accomplishment that you'd like to master in the next year?
Yeah, you know, of course, every soda operator wants to achieve what they call mountain goat status. You know, that's one that I would like to achieve. I would like to get there. I think it takes a little more time, because every association's different, and our mountains in Alberta tend to be a little more involved. So we're not going to be doing multi 10-day summits in a day. That'll never happen. Our 4-pointers usually require over 1,000 meters elevation gain, sometimes technical skills to get there. So it happens much more slowly for us here, but that's one. The other is I love to operate when I travel. And I'm trying to figure out the next time I go to the United Arab Emirates, they have just got their SOTA association set up, and none of their summits have been activated yet. And I would love to go there and do SOTA in the UAE.
As a guy who lives in the Middle East, we have a mountain range. The highest mountain happens to be the southernmost highest mountain of Lebanon. We share the Mount Hermon with the Lebanese and the Syrians, as a matter of fact. But then I think of the UAE, and I think there are mountains in the UAE. So now I'm going to get out my Google Maps and see where those mountains are. What kind of summits do they have in the UAE?
Well, that's the interesting thing. Every SOTA association, what they'll do is they'll determine the base of your lowest mountain to the top of the highest mountain and come up with a point system in between. So there's no attempt to make it uniform between associations. So those, all the mountains at the border with Oman, all of those, which most of us would probably call them hills.
Right, or sand dunes.
Yeah, or sand dunes. Yeah, but still they are what they have in the UAE, and every association will use what you've got. In fact, it's interesting in Canada, we are bordered by Saskatchewan, which is a prairie province. So you have Alberta, which is a mountain province, and we have Saskatchewan next door. So there's an area called the Cypress Hills that sits right on the border between Alberta and Saskatchewan. And if you go down there and activate a SOTA summit, it's a 1-pointer in Alberta. But if you walk a few miles across the border to Saskatchewan, it's a 10-pointer because it happens to be their highest mountain. So that anomaly takes place everywhere in the world. And so UAE will have their own mountains and whatever they got. I think the thing that makes SOTA fun is wherever you live, you can have as much fun as anybody else is having just from the hills or mountains that you have close to home.
Did you meet a large number of hams at the UAE club when you were there?
Yeah, I did, and very welcoming, warm people. I've visited their club there a couple times, and it's fun to go there and operate because it's just different than anything at home. I've loved going over there, and they're great, generous. The Arabs are such wonderful, hospitable hosts, and they're so good to visitors and guests. I love going there.
Well, we were talking a little bit before we started, and that is that Israel is now has diplomatic relations with the UAE, and there's this anticipation that we'll be flocking in both directions. So I think the UAE now has a flight 3 times a week to Israel. And as I said at the beginning, all of my QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo staff is in Dubai. We're anxious to actually get together at some point when the COVID restrictions lift. And I think the COVID restrictions in Dubai are actually probably even more severe than in Israel.
Yeah, I think they are. And it is one of the most positive things that's happening in the world today to see those relationships between Israel and some of the Gulf countries solidify. It's nice to see that, and I'm glad that that's happening. It's wonderful to see.
Well, we've been stifled here. I mean, with the COVID, up until the COVID, 60% of Israelis leave the country every year to travel. We love to travel.
Yeah.
So having a direction to go east is very exciting, for us. Yeah, we're looking forward to it.
It will be nice, and you'll love Dubai. It's just a lot of fun. It's one of the most interesting places I've ever been.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Are there any other, besides Japan and the Arab world, are there other places that you go now that you find especially interesting? And when you go there, do you look up the hams?
Yeah, every time I go down to the States, I try to do SOTA activations. And I was recently on a trip to New Mexico, and I looked up a local SOTA operator there and did an activation with him. My brother is a biologist with the New Mexico Game and Fish, and I was helping him do a ptarmigan reintroduction into the Pecos Wilderness there near Santa Fe, and I did a soda summit while I was down there. But it's a great activity to take anywhere you travel, because there are mountains everywhere. And like when I go on a business trip to Japan, it's so nice to take a day off and just hit the hills and do an activation. And you meet local people. Ham radio, take the UAE for example. How else am I ever going to meet local Emiratis that are involved, that live there and are residents there?
Regular people, not business associates.
Exactly. It's so nice. And so ham radio offers that opportunity, whether it's soda or just visiting clubs. It's a wonderful activity to bring us together.
Have you had a chance to go back to Kenya with your amateur radio license?
I have, and I have taken the radio there. When I was there last, I didn't actually operate. Since I lived in Kenya, I live more with the locals. I actually have a sister who is there, who is African. And so when I'm with her in her community, it's a pretty, most people would say, a sketchy area. It's not a place you really want to take your radio equipment around. And so I haven't done an awful lot of operating, but when I go there, I would like to. They don't have an association formed for soda either. So there's not the Summits on the Air draw in Kenya as well. But Kenya is also a wonderful place to visit, a great place to be in, wonderful people. It's a second home to me.
What advice would you give to new or returning hams to the hobby?
The biggest thing I would say is to find something you're interested in. Activities like Summits on the Air, have drawn in people that would otherwise not be interested in radio. There's a lot of activities like this. Parks on the Air, portable operations are a lot of fun, and they're bringing in something like Summits on the Air, for example. It's increasing in popularity all the time. Every year, there's more people that are involved in it, and those people are getting younger and younger, and which is completely opposite of many aspects of our hobby. So I would encourage people to find something that they love. Everybody who starts the hobby will become, I hesitate to use the word bored, but they will become to the point where it's no longer, whatever they were interested in at one time is no longer exciting, and they need to find something that will excite them, because there are many things out there.
I had somebody ask me today about amateur radio, like, oh, did people still do that? I mean, I say that at the beginning of because that seems to be the first question that people say is like, oh, do people still do that? And then you kind of say, yeah, but the internet has made it possible that there's a million things in ham radio now.
Yes. And the technology, yeah, it is. It is. And, I'm people who see me operating on a summit will say, is that a ham radio? I didn't know that's a ham radio. Can they be that small? And you think 20 years ago, to do what I do on a summit would have taken a line of porters 5 people deep behind me carrying lead acid batteries, big radio equipment. And now with 1 kilo, I can do everything. And so that's another aspect of the hobby that has increased the ability for us to do it. And it has made it way more fun for way more people.
Paul, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. I realized that when we first started communicating, you thought perhaps we wouldn't have anything to talk about. I'm so grateful that you said yes, and that we had this opportunity to get to know each other, and that the listeners to the QSO Today podcast and the people who viewed your presentation and can still view your presentation at the QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo, well, when they're watching your presentation, will have some background information on you that will make it that much more enjoyable. So with that, I want to thank you so much and wish you 73.
Thank you, Eric. It's been a pleasure, and 73.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Paul. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in VA6, that's Victor Alpha 6, Mike Papa Mike, in the search box at the top of the page. My thanks to ICOM America for its support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of ICOM America by clicking on their banner in the show notes pages. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any other episode into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes pages, or use my Amazon link before shopping at Amazon. Amazon gives me a small commission on your purchases while at the same time protecting your privacy. I'm grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference as I head towards episode 400. QSO Today is now available in the iHeart Radio, Spotify, YouTube, and a bunch of other online audio services, including the iTunes Store. Look on the right side of the show notes pages for a listing of these services. You can use the Amazon Echo and say, "Alicia, play the QSO Today podcast from TuneIn." My thanks to Ben Bresky, who edits every single show and allows both this host and my guest to sound brilliant. Thanks, Ben. Until next time, this is Eric, 4Z1UG, 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.